Hi, I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime magazine. I'm here today with Gordon Lawson, CEO at Conceal, provider of an intelligence-grade zero-trust technology that protects global companies of all sizes from malware and ransomware. To learn more about our sponsor Conceal, visit conceal.io. Also joining us is the former White House CIO Teresa Payton and Alyssa Abdullah, aka Dr. J, PhD, Deputy Chief Security Officer and SVP of Emerging Corporate Security Solutions at MasterCard. Welcome, Teresa, Dr. J, and Gordon. Great to have all three of you with us today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Great to be with all of you.
Thank you, Steve. Great to be here.
So, Teresa, you recently wrote an opinion piece in Newsweek titled, "America is Losing the Quantum Race with China." Perhaps you can start off by giving us a 30,000-foot view of what were you trying to get across? What is it that we need to know?
Sure. Well, for starters, the countries that sort of win the war in quantum technology and corner the market are going to be the countries with both economic prosperity, but also will hold the keys to ensuring that privacy and security of data as we know it is in place. One of the things that quantum computing can create a real challenge for all of us is quantum computing is nothing but a big old math problem, right? So today's computers process things as fast as they can, but they are limited to converting everything to ones and zeros. They're either on or off. So that's kind of a good way to look at sort of the way that computers handle processing and mathematical problems like encryption of our data and passwords and other things that really matter. And with today's modern 256-bit encryption, what that gives you is about 78 digits worth of possible combinations. So, Steve, I like to think of this as, I sort of picture that Hollywood movie where the burglars have their ear up to the safe and they're trying to crack the code. Today's computers, in order to break encryption, this is pre-quantum computing, it would take millions of years to sort through all of the combinations. Now, quantum computing, because what I love about it is it's going to give us processing speeds we've never seen before. I mean, we could potentially do customized individual cures for diseases like cancer, because we'll be able to crunch through all of past cases, your data, and find the right cure just for you. So there's so much amazing computing power tied up in trying to figure out quantum computing. But it can also be the way we break today's encryption. So it's going to be operating, it's neither a 1 nor a 0, it's both at the same time, basically stateless, which means it'll be operating at a speed never before thought possible. So post-quantum computing, we'll have to think about encryption, but also about how do we transact our digital lives, our digital businesses, once quantum computing is here.
So, Dr. J, you have a large following, but I'm not sure how many people know that you were trained as a cryptologic engineer at the U.S. Department of Defense early in your career. That aside, I'm sitting here and I get like kind of that blank stare once Teresa starts talking math. I know you don't, but help everybody out, Dr. J, because most of us aren't mathematicians, but we need to understand, what does this mean?
So, Teresa teed it up like perfectly, like as she always does. It's really a cryptography problem, and I'm going to try to reduce it down to the most basic terms. Remember back in school when you thought about factoring these numbers? Well, that's what quantum computing is about. It's about factoring large primes, factoring large numbers. And so cryptography relies on the difficulty of factoring and the time-consuming nature of factoring of classical computers. That's kind of what makes cryptography so great. But now quantum computing comes in and says, well, I can take the power of all of these different computers and combine it all together, and I can break it a lot faster than you ever expected. And so it's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you think about, all of the great things, all of the great benefits, sitting in a football stadium and everybody being able to, kind of capture replay and screen, zoom in and zoom out and all these type of things. And then you think of it from a mathematical side of, point of view, and you say, oh my goodness, now we actually have something that can break RSA 256-bit encryption. And now what does that mean? And what does that mean for security? And what does that mean, from a mathematical perspective, where we thought, oh my goodness, we've done it. We've been able to encrypt data, and it's going to be lasting us in perpetuity. And actually in perpetuity is coming to an end.
So, Gordon, when I read through this article, I had to go back through it a couple of times. The first time, just technically, I was trying to get a grip on this race, where we really stand. But when I went back through it and read it the third time, I'm thinking about my kids. I'm thinking about my business. I'm thinking about, every one of us, every citizen here in our country, and what it could mean to us if we lose this race. Maybe you can, break it down, Gordon, insofar as the vendor community and how important it is for them to be focused on this problem.
No, absolutely, Steve. Well, let me start off by saying that, I started my career as a naval officer, driving ships around. And when I think about cryptography or cryptology, which is essential to what our forces use when they're, especially against this particular nation state and all the things that are going on in that Indo-Pacific region. If China wins the quantum race, we got real problems, a real disadvantage on the geopolitical front in terms of a potential conflict there, right? So our forces have to be able to communicate securely and in an encrypted fashion. And that's one just major threat on the defense landscape that we got to be aware of. But going back to how vendors can help here is, there are quantum requirements that we're seeing now emerge from DoD when you're trying to provide services there. I think that it's very hard from a resource perspective without government assistance for any cybersecurity vendor to really meet those requirements, because quantum computing is still quite rare and difficult for a private company to get access to unless you're a major corporation. So there has to be continued help, I think, from the government side to ensure that we're keeping up and maintaining the standards. But I also think it goes back to some aspects of cloud security. And one of the things that we're seeing is there continues to be a migration for private companies with some of the most sensitive assets moving to the cloud, right? This has to be at the forefront of those commercial cloud providers and how we as a vendor community interact with those commercial cloud providers. Because if encryption gets affected at that layer, we got real problems with vulnerabilities that exist. So it's a really tough problem, but one that we're certainly keeping an eye on.
So I feel like about this point, there's a lot of calculating going on. I think people are very interested in this, but they're trying to, figure out, mathematically, what is quantum all about insofar as this race. Teresa, there's a lot of numbers in your opinion piece, and one of them is that China's technology can accomplish in 1 millisecond what would take a typical computer 30 trillion years. That's unimaginable to me. Is that an exaggeration just to drive home a point, or is that real?
Well, it is possible that their capability could be somewhat exaggerated until everything is allowed to be in an open academic peer review, which it hasn't been. We don't really know for sure, but assuming that we're even close to what they said their capability is, Steve, here's what I envision. So, for example, if they want to reverse engineer any technology that we or any other countries have spent years, expensive research and development, and they want to reverse engineer it, and they've won the quantum computing war, they're going to be able to do it in a very short order. Additionally, this type of computing power, not just in if China decides they want to use it as a nation state and do something to target America or other countries, certainly that is frightening to consider. But let's just say it ends up just in the wrong hands of just cyber criminal syndicates. The ability for them to crack pre-quantum computing encryption, take information, then put it into quantum computing encryption and run away with it. And our ability to stop, spot, detect, and even know what they took will be greatly hindered. And, so we really, the cybercrime we have today is not even anywhere near the type of cybercrime we could potentially be facing tomorrow, depending upon quantum computing only being in the hands of a few and not being commercially available. The other piece could be, they could win the innovation and design war. So if they have quantum computing first, then they have the opportunity to crunch data at speeds and scale that other countries don't have. And suddenly other countries, from an innovation and invention perspective, are actually going to be greatly behind.
So Dr. J, Teresa says to think like a mathematician in her piece, and unfortunately, it's just not something that I can do. So, help me out here. I want to talk about these numbers just one more time before we move on. Teresa says that using modern 256-bit encryption, you have 78 digits worth of possible combinations to sort through. I mean, just how big is that? How many combinations are we talking about?
We're talking like lots, many, and I can't even pronounce the word. I had practiced and practiced and practiced so I could say the word today, and I still can't even pronounce it. That number is so large. There's a thing called Peter Shor's algorithm, and Shor's algorithm says that it actually proves that large scale quantum computing can factor large number primes, and that's what I talked about in the very beginning. Large number primes, being able to factor large numbers and their composite primes and record numbers of time in efficient ways that we never ever even thought. And the thing about it is, I remember I'm a certified cryptologic engineer with the National Security Agency. I remember as a co-op student coming in and talking about quantum computing, talking about elliptical curve algorithms and things like that. And that was, I'm not going to even tell you how many years ago, but that was X number of years ago. So we have known this is coming. We have known, I'm like 30 years into my career at this point. We have known this. We should be, as Teresa and Gordon very eloquently put out, looking at this problem, solving how we will address, how we will stay in front of, so that we can continue to stay in front of the adversary. We can't continue, as a lot of companies across the world, we can't be on the back foot of this. We can't be on the back foot of cybersecurity. We've been talking about this problem. We've been researching this problem, and now we've got to put some meat to the bone and continue public and private partnerships to continue to move this forward, because it's not going to go away. We look around and say, oh, we've got 10, 15 more years. No, we actually don't. We actually don't.
So, Gordon, you and I have been on together, and we've had, some guests join us talking about, cybersecurity in the boardroom. We've talked about data breaches and cyber attacks, planning ahead, responding to them. But this is something altogether different. Talk to us about, those boardroom executives. Talk to us about CEOs. What does it mean to them if we lose this race, and how involved should they be in helping us win this race?
Well, I think there's a key piece here that is definitely a CEO and boardroom discussion. This is a counterintelligence threat. As we interact with cyber teams at the Fortune 500, the Global 2000, we're kind of hearing this again and again, because I think of the nature of our company as sort of a national security vetted organization, right? With the folks we have around us and our legacy. And they're saying, hey, we know that our data is being infiltrated. We're concerned about this. How can we protect it better? And so I think that a lot of CEOs, they're not going to be able to directly influence the United States' ability to develop quantum faster, but they can take a stronger stance towards protecting their own data and making sure that the right controls are in place. And I think also not being naive about the threat from particular nations when it comes to stealing data. Right. So I think it starts there with a very clear-headed approach. That doesn't mean that you stop doing business in China. Right. That's not what I'm saying, because that's not going to happen overnight. But let's be clear about there's certain assets, there's certain intellectual property that we need to do a better job of safeguarding. And I think that's really where it starts. And I think that Teresa had a great point, and Dr. J has a great point about if we're not careful, this capability will end up in the hands of criminals, right? And these criminal gangs are in cahoots with the nation state actors that perpetrate this. And so that really is where I think a lot of the fear needs to be, and it needs to go back to let's get our own house in order. Let's continue to be secure and understand that threat in order to be better prepared for the quantum capabilities that are coming.
So Teresa, Dr. J, the two of you both worked at the White House previously. Tell us a little bit about, what's coming out of the White House recently. There have been some announcements, and hopefully we're moving towards avoiding this nightmare scenario, and a nightmare, I think, is an accurate description of what I read in the article. So maybe we'll start with you, Teresa.
Sure. I mean, one of the things I will say is that there are some really positive, encouraging steps in the right direction. So President Biden did sign an executive order. One of the things that his administration has announced is that the National Quantum Initiative Advisory Committee will actually be taking direction and reporting to the White House. That is really important. What I would like to see in addition to that is, besides the centralized government response, we really do have to have a comprehensive approach beyond the Beltway. So, I mean, Gordon and Dr. J have said it. It has to be private sector enterprise, academia, and then also beyond our own borders, we do need to work with sort of like the European Union, perhaps, have conversations with Canada, the South Pacific, and really start to have conversations, not just about sharing best-in-class technology, but setting international standards and guidelines. We may even need an international treaty that says the countries that have access to quantum computing, sort of the do's and don'ts and the rules of the road, and if you don't follow them, what are the repercussions for that? So it has been very encouraging to see the Biden administration really step forward, lean forward, and say, this is serious. Whether or not we see any legislation on the Hill to encourage either research and development tax credits or laws or legislation around this, I think their legislative agenda is busy with other things. But it's going to be up to kind of the rest of us, private sector, government, to collaborate and come up with creative ideas here.
Teresa took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, really, the administration has, I would say, been timely, right? But we can't wait to see what the outcome of that initiative is going to be. We can't sit around and wait and say, well, when they come out with their paper, with their white paper, then we'll react. That is not the stance that we're pushing here. The stance that we're pushing is, while the federal government has taken some leadership and put things together, there's a public-private partnership that has to happen. And then the private sector is doing things as well. You've got Google, you've got MasterCard, you've got, Microsoft, you've got a whole bunch of companies that are looking at the quantum challenge and quantum technologies and the challenge that we will face from a cybersecurity perspective, and how quantum computing is challenging our own assumptions that we had made for so long in security. And so you take all of that together. We can't solve this in a siloed perspective, but you take the best of all things and you put it together and you've got one great genius, right? I always say that I'm not the best, but you take me and my entire team and everybody I know in my network and all of you, then I'm one big genius. I think we solve that problem in the same way.
So, Gordon, any final thoughts on what we heard today? It's a complicated topic. It's a scary topic. It's a real topic. Maybe some final thoughts.
Well, I think as Teresa and Dr. J pointed out, this is a very complicated issue, but it's a bipartisan issue, and I'm confident with Chris Inglis, who I've known over the years, and Jen Easterly in the White House, that we're looking at it. we have a lot of work to do, but I think this is something that just fundamentally will affect us as a nation if we don't get our arms around it. And I think one other point I would say, Steve, this is something that you and I have talked about on previous podcasts, is this goes to the importance of STEM education for our youth in this country. If we don't have more people that understand cryptography and have that fundamental technological base to be able to help us stay disciplined and get to the next level in our universities, then we're going to fall behind. And so we have to, as folks in industry, and all of us have to continue to invest in that, encourage the children of America and our allies to get that strong engineering, computer science background so that we can compete. And I think that's something that, frankly, the country that we've talked about today is doing a really good job of, and we are kind of doing a mediocre job and have a lot of work to do. And so I would just encourage folks listening, let's continue to encourage our kids to get into this field and to make us stronger as a nation.
So Dr. J, your mother was or is a mathematician, right? Mm-hmm. And she encouraged you. What are you hearing? You talk to a lot of your peers. You're very wired into the community academics. Are we, doing what we need to do to get more kids interested in math and ultimately in cyber?
I would say yes and no. I want to say no, but I've got to say yes, because I can't undermine the efforts that are being made, and that we have moved the needle. We haven't moved the needle enough. I think math topics, when you go to a student and say, hey, you want to learn more about quantum computing? No, that doesn't sound like fun. We have to do better with how we communicate these things, how we, make it sound cooler. Because to be honest with you, when you think about the benefits of quantum and even the scary part of quantum, we communicate it and say it in the right way. It is a fabulous problem to tackle. It is so cool and it is so interesting. But I think we make it so heavy when we go to schools. And I continue to pound the pavement on that and say we have to figure out a way. It's like they say, men come from Venus and women come from Mars or whatever. It's the same thing when you talk about STEM and math and computer science and those type of career fields. We have to communicate in a way that it's being received by other generations.
So, Teresa, final word from you. You wrote the article. It stirred a lot of interest. We need to have more. You're a mom. You have kids. Where are we with getting more young people involved?
We need to do a better job. I think Dr. J really kind of hit the nail on the head there. And it should be starting in preschool. We should really be encouraging. I always say to people when they ask me, hey, what would you encourage my kid to do as they're thinking about things? And I'd say, well, make sure they take more than one language, more than one foreign language, and more than one computer language. And, just really help them understand so much is a black box these days, and really help them understand the inner workings of the black box, so that there's a realm of possibilities open to them. Maybe they won't join cybersecurity or quantum computing, but maybe they become a great medical researcher and they know how to use the technology to solve what are today terminal illnesses. And maybe these terminal illnesses won't be terminal anymore, but it starts with really understanding what kind of processing power and technology do you actually have at your disposal before you pick a different field and discipline. I know we're very committed to ensuring that we're training not just the K through 12 and college students, but also there are people who don't have that opportunity to go to college. And then there's people who are already in the workforce that are looking for ways to get retrained. And so we've been working on ways to make cybersecurity more accessible, affordable, as Dr. J said, approachable. And yeah, it's really cool and fun what we do in this field. And we just have to do a little bit better branding and marketing and really get out of our own way to reach people in different disciplines that we typically don't go and talk to.
Teresa, Dr. J, Gordon, great conversation today. I learned a lot. I know our audience did, and look forward to having the three of you back on with us soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime magazine. This interview is sponsored by Conceal, provider of an intelligence-grade zero-trust technology that protects global companies of all sizes from malware and ransomware. To learn more about our sponsor, visit conceal.io. You can keep up with all of our media at cybercrimemagazine.com.